Welcome to Conflict Managed. I'm your host, Mary Brown. Conflict Managed is a weekly podcast about toxic work environments and how to fix them. We're glad you're here. Good morning, Heather, and welcome to Conflict Managed.
Good morning, Mary. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I know it's going to be really interesting, and we're going to talk a lot about age at work and how that is a bonus for us all, having a multi-generational workforce. But before we get to that, we want to hear more about you. And so, can you tell us about the first job you ever had as a young person?
The first job I ever had as a young person was working in the Nordstrom shoe department. And I definitely enjoyed it. I was in high school at the time, and it was just a typical retail job. But yeah, that was my first job.
That sounds like a fun job. What did you, when you look back, you had fond memories of it. What did you enjoy about it?
I definitely liked interacting with people, and I liked being able to solve or make sure that they got the shoes they wanted.
Mhm.
So I like to be able to deliver is my point. Yeah.
So where'd you go from there?
So like a lot of people, I went to university. My first job outside of university was an assistant to a big group of engineers who were building cell towers at the time
Hmm.
for cell phone coverage. And so that was really interesting because I got to learn about something I didn't know that much about. I handled all their expenses and their travel arrangements, but I also used the opportunity to ask them questions about what they were building and how it worked. And you know, I've even to a certain extent, some of the technical aspects of it. So I found that really interesting. And then I went back to get my master's degree, and then after I got my master's degree, I did a number of jobs that I worked for the conference board for a while, for the American Psychological Association, for a couple of tech firms, and all of my jobs sort of focused on either marketing or technical writing or communication or strategy. So that's always been sort of the realm that I'm comfortable in. But I am very interested in emerging technology and not so much the very like baseline technical details, but certainly what the implications are, how it works, how it can work better in different situations. So I've always found that very interesting.
Think about that first job that you had, first professional job. What was the management like there?
So I am a Gen X generation, and my management was, like I said, it was a big group of engineers. It was all men, and it was many of these men were from other countries, the Middle East, India, and places like that. They were very kind, I remember, but it was definitely highly hierarchical. I think you know, they wanted people to be competent and to do a good job. The internet was not new, but it was starting to make inroads into how we do our work and how we conduct searches and communicate and all of that. So I found that again, very interesting. But it was definitely top-down type, I think it's called type X management, where you have to be seen to be productive. You can't, they don't, if you're not there, they don't trust that you're working. And it was very hierarchical.
Mm,
And I've seen that change. Those norms have changed a lot.
yeah. How long were you there?
So I was there probably about 2 years before I went off to university again to get my master's degree. And it was a very my first job professional job was a very positive experience.
Mm.
Even though looking back on it now, I think, wow, that's such an outdated cultural soup that I was swimming in, but it was contemporary at the time.
Right. I mean, at the time, it is what it is, right? And so
Right.
even if somebody's first job today in 2026 is in a control and command environment, top down, whatever it might be, it's going to be normal to that person. And
Yeah.
even in those outdated modes, people can be kind. And that really does make a difference. I mean, there's
Yeah.
efficiency, absolutely. But then there's the how does it feel to go to work? Am I wanted here? Is there a kind of sense of belonging, even if the
Mhm.
structure is working against itself, working against getting the best out of people? You can still have, of course, you can have a more of a flat, a flat way of thinking about hierarchical relationships, and it be chaos and not a good place to be.
Yeah, certainly.
So, what is it about? innovation and communication, technical writing, that world of business that speaks to you?
I really like what I would call cross-disciplinary thinking.
Mm.
I really enjoy connecting findings in one field with, established ways of doing work in another. So that's what I find fascinating. Everybody does enjoy, I think, those stories where, for example, a group of engineers was looking for how to cool a set of buildings without using too much electricity. And so they decided they couldn't solve the problem without electricity. And then they stumbled upon another colleague who was interested in termites. And then they studied termite mounds. And, those kinds of stories are so fascinating, how people solve problems by borrowing ideas from other disciplines. And so that I think is the key thing for me that makes it so interesting. But also just being curious and learning new things is very stimulating.
Yeah, I love that creativity. And a lot of times we fool ourselves in thinking creativity is about, it's found in the arts. And if you don't have a job in the arts, but actually, obviously, we know that science and technology, what we have today is because of creativity and because of partnerships and unlikely places. Because if we stay in the likely places, we're going to get more of what we have, right? And so
Exactly.
that this looking and curiosity, no matter what kind of field we're in, I think people by nature are creative, and the more we interact well with our colleagues, then the more we're going to see, imagine, and we're going to have better products and services and experiences at work.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
So you now work at AARP. How did you get there?
I have been at AARP for 19 years. I'm trying to think how did I get started here? My first job with AARP was working on the for-profit side, the for-profit subsidiary of AARP, which is called AARP Services, and I was brought on to help with contract negotiations that were really big. It was a really big, wide-ranging kind of contract, and so I was a junior member of the team and was helping out with sort of the web and digital side of the ideas that were being generated in these fruitful and productive contract discussions. So that's how I got started. But then I moved over to the nonprofit side here at AARP, the social mission part, and really found my groove. I really love doing what I do now. And there was just an opening for employer engagement, an employer engagement role. And so I came over here for that. It was not that I had any HR experience. I just had the network and the connections and again the communication skills. And so that's how I've taken that role and grown from there.
So 19 years, it's a long time to be in an organization, but you've had a variety of roles.
Yep.
Um, so let's talk about what you do. And I think that when we think about age at work, right, we've got our multi-generational workforce. And so what concerns do older workers bring to you most often? What kind of concerns pop up regularly?
So by far the most frequent concerns or challenges or questions that we get from older workers center around getting a job.
Hmm.
So they're not necessarily worried about losing their current job or not having enough runway to like know that they need to pivot. That's not, I mean, those are some concerns, but they're much more concerned about getting a new job if they are suddenly displaced. And that is by far the most frequent fear that they bring, but also the source of that fear, in other words, why they think they would struggle to find a new job is age discrimination. So I'm just going to look down here at my notes. We've just done in July of this year published some survey data, and it's a huge amount of people who blame age discrimination as the driving barrier or challenge to getting a new job. So 34% blame age discrimination as the reason for their anticipated difficulty. And if you asked, the survey asked the 50 plus how easy or difficult they think it would be to get a new job if you were looking right now. And there's a great deal of pessimism. 65% believe it would be difficult. So that's kind of the primary concern. We also know that this is borne out by historical data that it does tend to take older workers longer to find a new job when they've been displaced. Not so much if they're currently working and looking to pivot. But when they're displaced, it takes them longer to get back into the job market, and they tend to make less initially at their new job than they did in their previous. So it takes them time to build back up. And that can be really impacting towards our ability to save for retirement. The closer you are to retirement, if you're displaced and you take a long time to get back and then make less, it really impacts your ability to save for retirement. So that's why it's such an important issue for AARP, because our mission is to empower people to choose how they live as they age. And so much of that has to do with both financial and health security.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, like whenever, so I'm Gen X. I'm 50. How old am I? I'm 53. And if I were looking for a job right now, I know what I'm supposed to do, which is take off references to how long ago I went to college, like all these sorts of things. And so, just in the information that you're given about what you would need to do to find a job, like you cut off all the stuff that's so many years old. So that message is already getting out there that age is something to you don't want them to know. And
Mm.
it's so curious because we also know with age comes wisdom. We also know that when you've been around for a while, you have this insight, this ability, this network. So why this gap of what we really do know about people with experience and how that's a valuable commodity to have, and yet this gap of what people anticipate and actually what they find about having a hard time getting jobs.
Yeah, it's definitely a frustrating uh, conundrum. It's certainly contradictory that you are, on the one hand, you want to convey to a future employer that you have this wealth of experience, that you know how to do this job that you're applying for, that you bring a lot of not only skills, but experience and even networks to the role. And yet to get past the screening and through, and by the way, it's difficult for everybody to get
Yeah,
past the screening.
right.
I definitely want to acknowledge that. But it's for older workers, they are, it's been shown through research where people send out, the identical resumes, but change the age, that, the callbacks are not the same for older workers, that there are fewer. So that is the sort of one of the driving sources. But even beyond that sort of technical reason of, getting past the bots, there are human beings on the other end of those algorithms that are saying, we're looking for people of a certain set of characteristics, and we tend, without meaning to, and often now that these platforms are becoming coming under more scrutiny, there's not an explicit sort of direction to the algorithm to weed out people of a certain age, but the algorithm learns what companies tend to like based on who they tend to hire, and so it sort of compounds the problem. Another thing is that companies are there's they're a business, and they want to run as efficiently as possible, and they want to cut down, and personnel or human resource costs are a big part of that. Companies would love to have people with lots of experience who are at a low salary of a beginner, a younger worker. So there's that as well.
Yeah, it is so very interesting. I mean, I could think about it from an older vision of when my father-in-law started at Otis Elevator. He was there for 43 years. And so if the value is your goal and expectation is you're going to start someplace and you're going to be there your whole work career, then we want to hire young people. We want to train them in our way, and then we will have them until retirement. But that is no longer the case. That is no longer the expectation, right? We say many workers stay 2 to 3 years, employers want at least 5, and so that sort of argument for why we might want somebody to start at the beginning is not there. And so we want the experience, but we don't want to pay for it on
Right.
the one hand. And yet then I hear from um, people who are hiring in HR or in the C-suite a frustration with younger workers. And so there's this frustration, which um, anyway, I'm interested in ageism on both ends, right?
Yes.
Of course. And so there are all these stereotypes that everybody is hitting up against. But it seems that, this age discrimination is just not really considered and talked enough about for the older generation.
I agree. It's certainly true that there's plenty of ageism towards younger workers. I mean, that's just a fact. I see it all the time when I talk to employers who come up to me after I have spoken at a conference, and they say, oh, these young people, they're so difficult to get them to work hard. So then I have to gently remind them that's ageist as well. So yes, that's true. However, older workers, the impact of ageism on older workers tends to be in much more material ways. So in terms of promotions or not getting promotions, not being included on innovative projects, getting forced out or rift out. Whereas with younger people, that ageism is more cultural and emotional, where they feel not valued, and that will make, that does contribute to them wanting to leave. They don't feel valued, they don't feel respected, and that impacts engagement. So there's different impacts, but yes, ageism is at both ends of the spectrum, unfortunately.
Yeah. So it sounded to me that you were putting some of the cause of the ageism or the discrimination from older workers is that how much, because they have experience, what their salary, what their expectations are. So it's like a money issue. Do you think it really does come down to we just like want to keep labor costs down and older workers are more expensive? Is that what it is?
I don't think that's only it, but I think it is certainly a factor. So if you're very clear about the salary range of a job and an older worker applies to that job, my advice to employers is give that older colleague or job applicant the benefit of the doubt. If the salary range is clear and the companies absolutely need to hire people within the salary ranges that they've agreed. I'm not arguing that they should overturn that. But maybe this older colleague is really interested in that role for other reasons. Maybe they want to pivot. Maybe they would like to downshift a little bit in terms of intensity. So that's really more where I feel like employers can sometimes make assumptions that older workers are going to want a higher salary when that may not be the case. And again, the salary range is what it is. As long as that's clearly communicated, then I think you can remove those ageist stereotypes you might hold in your head as either an HR manager or a hiring manager. And I think the other big one, the big stubborn stereotype is that older workers are not good with technology. And that's very frustrating to me for having done this work for a number of years now, because that's again, when you say older worker to an employer, do they think 65? Do they think 55? Do they think 50? I mean, most 50-year-olds I know are, including myself, are very conversant with and comfortable with technology, expect to work with technology, expect that we have to stay current in our skills. So again, that stereotype is just so ingrained that that can also be a barrier in addition to what we might call wageism.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is interesting when I come across a couple of things you said that resonate with me. And one is this ageism, the stereotype with technology. And what I have found is sometimes people shoot themselves in their foot. They will grandfather somebody in like, oh, you don't need to learn this technology because maybe it's uncomfortable and maybe you don't want to. And then a new technology comes and then a new technology. And now this person is farther and farther behind. And so the employer's looking at them and saying, well, why don't you know this? And the employee is saying, but you told me that I can just keep on doing it the way that
Mhm.
I want to do it. And so I see both as culpable as that everybody, all workers need to stay up and have the skills that they need in order to stay in their job. And the reality is that we're always going to be changing. I mean, that is the workforce in which we're in. We should expect to always be having to learn new things, even if we liked what we were doing and liked the old program. It doesn't matter. In order to stay gainfully employed and to be an asset, we need to continue to grow and learn in our skills. But then employers also need to apply those rules to everybody equally, or else you see, I've seen this in my work that sometimes older workers are treated with derision and people talk about them behind their back because they've been sidelined because of somebody, quote unquote, being kind to them. And it's not kindness to,
Mhm.
unintentionally make it so that somebody becomes obsolete in a way because they haven't been asked to keep up.
That's so interesting. I have not encountered that, and it's
Mm.
it's really great insight. I do tell employers all the time, it's so important to encourage older workers to reskill. It's important to support them. the time when I feel like we're in the most crunch is when we have children and older relatives to take care of, and we're hitting our stride at our, professionally. And so all of these things converge at once, and we need support to have the flexibility to learn new skills. So I think yes, I agree. All workers should expect and know that they need to stay current, not only with their technology skills, but with other skills as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would think that, of course, depends on the sector that you're in, but we also have this question of, well, which technology? Is this a fad? Is this
Mhm.
nice to have? Is this something that everybody needs to know? And so I think every organization needs to figure out who's in charge of that, right? Who's in charge of figuring out what we're going to do, why we're going to do it, being very thoughtful, articulating that as to why this is what we're doing, what's an optional, what isn't an optional, and then having a plan to really encourage and help people, not just encourage them, but help them, train them to the new. And that we all have that expectation. But sometimes it's just sort of like we're throwing everything at the wall. And do I have to learn Snapchat? And do I have to learn, and now I'm over here and so we've got all these tabs open and that can be confusing for everybody. That's not just an age issue, but I think streamlining and I'm interested in getting rid of all kinds of ageism at work. I think one thing is we can help people no matter where they are, doesn't matter how old they are, if we can really streamline any kind of innovation in that field, having somebody be in charge of that so that the workforce is continually properly educated as they go instead of this question of, I think it's a more of question in smaller organizations. What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to know this? Who's in charge of it?
Yeah, and I think you raised a really good point about how quickly platforms can change, and some of them are fads. I mean, I don't think Snapchat is really as much of a player anymore, but TikTok is huge. So
Mhm.
sometimes colleagues and leaders mistake that sort of tech fatigue from older workers as resistance and not
Mhm.
being interested in technology, but having lived through a number of years of constant turnover of which collaboration platform we're using. Is it Slack? Is it Teams? Is it Google Hangout? You may be sort of confronted with yet another new system that you have to learn, saying, like, I'm going to just ride this out and wait for 6 months because it's probably going to be a different one
Right.
again. That can also often be interpreted as resistance and stubbornness, and that's where our ageist assumptions start to creep in again, when it can also just be tech fatigue.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And then, what does the younger colleague hear? They hear maybe this person is resistant, this person is out of it, this person has. And so, my solution to a lot of this issue is continued dialogue, right? So, continue dialogue with your team. I mean, the whole organization needs to be in dialogue, but specifically the people that you're working with. So, why am I not doing this new thing? Or why am I doing this new thing? If we can have those clear conversations that let everybody know, I'm not going to do this new thing because I'm not sure if this is what, if I need to, but if I need to, let me know. And if the other person hears, oh, she or he is willing to do this, that's not a resistance. It's just, is this the best use of my time? Are we going to try it for 6 months and then see, oh, everybody's off TikTok, or now millions and millions of people have joined, and so is our organization. So, that kind of conversation so that we don't set in our mind, right? Stereotypes, how do we not fall prey to them, which is something that that we all, can just, we just get from the commercials that we watch, from the whatever we consume, but asking those curious questions about, okay, well, I've seen this tired trope. Is it true? Is it true about that person, or is it just a narrative that I've made up?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So, when you think about these stereotypes, what are some best ways to address tension among ages so that we don't slip into, oh, they're like this because they're young, because they're old, because they're in the middle? What have you found are some best ways to help people not fall prey to this unnecessary stereotypes and tensions?
So I think there's sort of two domains that you need in the workplace to combat that. And the first is you need to have a clearly communicated set of consistent norms and policies, right?
Yes.
So that they need to apply to everyone. They need to be clear, and and even to a certain extent, there needs to be communicated reasons as to why we have these policies and norms. The second is the equally important, and it's harder to affect, and that is we need to develop a culture of digging beneath the surface a little bit with regard to when tensions arise or when differences come. So I like to categorize the differences between the generations as emerging along kind of three key fault lines. The first is communication styles. The second is norms about what I owe work and what work owes me. And then the third is levels of accommodation, expectations around accommodation and flexibility. And a lot of times when if I use the word professionalism or mental health or resilience, or flexibility, I know what I mean. You are also using those same words, but you have a very different understanding of what that word means. And asking each other, how did we arrive at that understanding of what these words or concepts mean? And applying that curiosity when that tension arises is really important. And I'll give you an example, which no doubt will resonate with you as a fellow Gen Xer. But when I was growing up, I do not have a memory of my parents accommodating me in any material way. I mean, I know they took my preferences and wishes into account. They listened to me, but I mostly conformed to what they needed to, for what was good for the family or what they needed. And when I entered the workforce, it would never have occurred to me to ask for accommodations for, and there wasn't the technology that allows the current level of flexibility. Nevertheless, it wasn't an expectation I had. That parenting style has changed a great deal, and so has the way we educate our children. There's a lot more accommodation allowed for and given within schools so that different learners can have different accommodations which can enable their success. Those are positive developments. It also means then that if that's the only soil you're raised in, you come into the office environment and you're expecting that it's fine for you to ask for accommodations, that you're supposed to ask for and receive accommodations, or that you have to push for your own advancement. So you ask about when you're going to get promoted. That is not the culture or norms that I grew up with. So again, getting underneath what each of us mean when a tension or a difference arises is really important to helping us get past those stereotypes. We may end up arriving at a set of norms that are not as we might want them, or we have to compromise. Businesses need to run. So, and this is often what I hear with regard to, well, if we just keep accommodating these younger workers, then how are we going to get the work accomplished that we need? And so, yes, we need to have, again, kind of goes back to those stated norms and clearly communicated policies, but extending that understanding to someone without prejudging them and fomenting these stereotypes that sort of just fester is key. I think it's, again, leading with curiosity, as you mentioned, because we tend to absorb these norms and then we don't change. I mean, most people, when you ask them how old they feel, they'll say 20, 25, 30. I'm 55 or I'm 45, but in their mind, they're still back as a young adult. So you carry those norms with you. Maybe you notice that they change a little bit, but then you're confronted with people who have totally different norms that seem to you to be disrespectful or seem to you to be asking for accommodations you didn't earn. Pausing to understand where that's coming from is so much better than just prejudging and being negative and harsh. And the same goes in reverse for younger workers who want to know why. Why do we do it this way? Why are we doing it the same way? And older workers may think, listen, I've been around the block enough to know that I can anticipate these problems before they happen, and we need to address them using the same tried and true methods. Maybe that's not always the case. But again, instead of a younger worker writing off an older colleague, really being curious and digging underneath, why do we do it this way? And the older worker and leadership having the patience to explain why. A lot of times, I think that helps to dispel some of the sort of the real toxic tensions that can come up around age at work.
Yeah, I like that you just said patience because um, if we just get upset and we just say, this person is being unprofessional, because whatever, however we fill in the blank, or, they're so, soft, or they're a snowflake, or they're so rigid, and they're so, whatever, however we fill that in because we're upset with the other person and we don't know what to do and we don't pause, we don't get curious, then we are going to waste time and money, and work is not going to be a good place to go. And so our physical and mental health are at risk when we don't have good work environments. But this idea of having patience with the other, this idea of being really curious about the other so that we can really communicate, right? Communication is not just saying the words. Like, again, if I say be professional, if I say be on time, if I say
Mhm.
dressed professionally, I hear one thing, you may hear something different or not. But if we don't unpack what those words mean, if we don't unpack the word why, is that good? Is that bad? Is it challenging authority? Is that showing engagement? What is it? Right? And so when I hear that, what am I hearing? If I don't take that time to pause and be patient, then we will cause more problems. So the idea of talking things through, having really clear norms and expectations that fit the group that we have right now, not the group that we had 20 years ago, 15 years ago, or 3 years ago, but continually aligning those expectations for the reality of the workplace today, the reality of our current workforce and whoever our constituents are that we're serving, and realizing that that is always changing as well. That I think about age-proofing your organization is by really figuring out how to have those constant conversations so that nobody is minimized. When we minimize people, when we choose not to listen to them because we don't like the way they are showing up or we don't like the change, well, we're just hurting ourselves instead of really articulating what are those boundaries, what are the non-negotiables, but why they are, where is the room for flexibility. I love the example of the younger person wanting to know why. And I think, I want to know why. Actually, most adults want to know why. Taking your physical and mental health seriously, hey, it turns out that's good for everybody, right? And so,
Yep, absolutely.
seeing what we really can learn from everybody all the way around, I think is one of those paths forward to get rid of those stereotypes and really be individualist and personalist with the people here. How do we communicate with the people on our team and our organization to hit the mission of whatever it is we're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right. And I think another thing that's sort of more along the hard sciences part of this is we have been in a post-industrial age for a long time,
Right.
but we're still struggling to measure the types of things that contribute to ROI and the bottom line that are difficult to grasp, like team dynamics, like soft skills. We call them soft skills, but other people call it human skills, durable skills. What is the impact of those on the bottom line? And if we could get better at understanding that, that provides a very clear business rationale for why we need a multi-generational workforce, why we need a diverse workforce, why we need people with lots of different skills. So this is something that I'm personally very interested in. I don't know if there are organizations out there trying to measure this. We know that employee engagement has been studied as having an enormous impact on the bottom line of a company. Tenure at a company also has been shown to positively affect the bottom line of a company. That doesn't always correlate with age, but it's sort of related. And so what are the individual contributions of older workers or the invisible contributions, I'm sorry, of older workers to the productivity of a team that may not be reflected in traditional productivity metrics? Um, I we're moving into this age of AI dominance where even coding itself is not something we do anymore. And I think older workers actually paradoxically have a great deal to offer companies who are trying to understand how much to invest in AI, to your point, which platforms to invest in, where do we insert it in our business processes, what are the downstream effects with other departments, how, sort of systems level understanding of a particular organization or industry. That contextual knowledge is something that older workers tend to have simply just by being around longer. And I think it's fascinating to me that technology is almost escaping our ability as humans. I mean, we're allowing it to take over a lot of the things that we used to do ourselves. And in that kind of environment, we need that contextual knowledge. We need that, what we often call wisdom or judgment, but is the relationship of different types of knowledge to other types of knowledge. Younger people have much faster processing speeds within their brains because they don't have as much of that honeycomb of the way that different types of knowledge interact with other types of knowledge. So there you need both, you need all ages. You need both types of brains, if you will, at the table. But people tend to write off older workers when it comes to anything related to technology, again, because of those stereotypes we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, and my view on technology is that technology is always there to serve us. We're not there to serve it. But that does take wisdom and discernment. Well, what does that mean for our organization, right? If you don't have anybody with institutional memory, if you don't have anybody who has seen the lay of the land, then how are we really going to be able to not just be, fall prey to the shiny thing out here? Because, oh, that sounds good, but we don't think about the downstream. We don't think about all of the different ways in which, because it hasn't been our experience yet. And so the younger worker has something very valuable to give and the insight that they have, but also, right, that this marriage of it's not either or. And so I would say to anybody that if you want to win in the marketplace today, we need diversity, right? We need diversity of thought and experience, and what I see is valuable. Therefore, if we see different things as valuable or as important, but we're all working towards the same mission, right? We all are clear about what we're trying to accomplish, then we should expect disagreement. We should expect to disagree with one another. And so then the art is in disagreeing well, because conflict is not the problem. It's the unmanaged conflict. And unfortunately, when it comes to age, we fall into these stereotypes. It's because you don't have a work ethic, or it's because
Mhm.
you are a dinosaur.
Yep.
So when you see age-based conflict show up at work, what are you hearing the most about, or what is your experience with maybe the older generation and when they have conflicts? What are they typically about?
A lot of the things we've been talking about with regard to assumptions about each other based on age and assumptions about each other because your norms are different from my norms. So certainly younger workers can feel disrespected that older workers, or the older half, let's say, of their colleagues are slower, or they're resistant to change, or they don't understand, the younger worker might not understand why we have to do it the way we've always done it. Older workers looking, experiencing their younger colleagues will often say things like, they're emotionally fragile, they're not resilient, they're not uh, professional. Again, like they expect accommodation, they expect promotions. And again, a lot of that boils down to different norms, but I also think that the time pressure that everyone is under and the fragmentation of our attention span, which is to a certain extent driven by a lot of these platforms that we're constantly interacting with, has made it difficult for us to have patience with each other and to take time to slow down and investigate that healthy tension. Because when you have healthy tension, I think this is kind of the point you're driving towards, that's where some of the most creative and innovative approaches come. So while you might be frustrated with a younger colleague asking you why, you should treat that as a golden opportunity to unpack what has worked in the past that we need to keep, and what has worked in the past that we should jettison, and what new ideas do you have that are sparked by talking to your younger colleagues and vice versa. And that's my vision and hope for what an age inclusive organization would look like. On the positive side, AARP has published some mentorship research, again, just like the late last year, that does show that people do enjoy working with people of other ages, that they do learn from each other. So it's not all a negative picture, even with a lot of these stereotypes and challenges that we all face at work with regard to ageism. Even with that, when we work together, and I always like to say stereotypes tend to break down in proximity to each other, we do start to realize that we have things to offer each other and to the company that we work for. And so there is a positive side too. I mean, overwhelmingly, I think it's like 89% of people that we surveyed of all ages enjoy working with colleagues from different ages, and not only different ages, but 10 years older or younger than they are. So that to me is very positive. And I just would love to have more of that because I think, again, companies could really, really benefit from that mix of ages if they're all included and respected and listened to, and also where they're all following kind of the same norms and policies.
Yeah, I love that so much. Because when we think about these stereotypes, it's, they're mostly all negative. And yet, what is the reality? And what could we have when we work well together? What do we miss if we don't have all the generations present? I think that's a really good question. What am I going to miss? Well, you're going to miss a lot because you are going to be making services and products for people like you. Okay, if
Mhm.
that's all you want to sell to or serve, and I mean, then you have the legal aspects of, of going down that route. But, when we pause and get reflective and think about all emotions are helpful indicators. And so if I'm frustrated with somebody else, I'm annoyed with somebody else, that's a really good question for me to ask about myself. Why am I having this emotional response? What could I be doing instead? I'm frustrated because I see this particular behavior. Why am I frustrated? Because not everybody is going to have that response. What am I not seeing? What conversation do I need to have? How can I get curious about myself? This is not to dismiss that we do have frustrations, but what can we do with it so that we can not fall into laziness, tired stereotypes that actually hold me back? What good is it for me to be frustrated with my colleague? If they're my colleague, that's reality. So I can choose to sit in my frustration and build narratives about them, or I can decide to do something else. Marshall Rosenberg says that everything that we do in our language, we're either building bridges towards each other or we're distancing ourselves. So I can choose to build bridges with anybody. If that's something that I choose to do, I can choose to understand why they're doing something. That doesn't always mean, it doesn't mean endorsing, but it's when I understand, then I can now see what is the path forward. So I think the antidote to our generation wars at work is real dialogue. And dialogue is not just one conversation, it's being in the habit of. So, how do we get these norms and expectations? Well, they have to be set and reset. It can't just be words because words shift, right? And it's in this sustained dialogue for me understanding you showed up in your best outfit and their ripped jeans. Okay, well, you
Mhm.
know, and those ripped jeans cost more than my whole outfit, right? And so, how do we understand the expectations, but by regularly expecting to have real dialogue, as you say, getting beneath what's going on, what is it we want, and how do we, to use the word accommodate, how do we help our colleagues have the best experience at work and in their life, and vice versa? That sort of synergy where we're all in it together to help each other, help our team, help the organization, and help society as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think humor can go a long way to helping with that. We have a series of TikTok videos, which we can send, so you can post them, that have our own colleagues at work in the building I'm in right now, with their yes, no paddles and being asked questions like, is it okay to wear jeans to work? Is it okay to talk about your dating life at work? All these fun questions and to see the difference of the different generations and how they say yes or no with their paddles. So that can be really fun. I also want to note, and I would be remiss in not noting this, that we talked about kind of the external guardrails of policies and norms. There are other external guardrails, including protection under the law. So the Age Discrimination in Employment Act is the piece of legislation in the United States that protects workers over 40. Over half of the workforce in the United States currently is over 40. So I often let employers know that. And strengthening those protections is really important. And bringing those protections up to the same level or the same standard as protections for other classes is a really important part of it matters a lot to AARP. So on an interpersonal level, at a team level, And even at a company level, I feel like when we interact with each other as people, we're motivated by those altruistic reasons.
Mhm.
We want the company to succeed. We like our colleagues. We want our teams to do well. But also at the external level, there are need for strong guardrails. And at the extrinsic, I think is the term level, what are those metrics that prove to a company that the bottom line is benefited by what are often seen as altruistic, feel good reasons to do something. So I think we need all of those
Yeah.
pieces in play to help address ageism and any other type of discrimination or othering at work.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I mean, we want to be motivated just because it's the right thing to do to treat people well. But and it is the right thing to do to treat people well. And we all benefit when we have the healthy work environment. But when we see, the return on investment, when we see that it just, money wise, it makes sense. There's so much money that's just burned on the pyre of
Mm.
mismanagement by not treating people well.
Yep.
And there are things that we can look at that, but like then we also, of course, need the law. So when there's a failure, maybe of the altruistic or misunderstanding or short-sightedness, right? Well, we don't want to lose money and we don't want to be subject to lawsuits, right? It's very important to shore up all of those. And I think it is also on the altruistic side, the internal side is to continue to change the norms, right? I would love to see the stereotypes or the stories when people get in the car on TikTok, instead of crying and screaming, about their colleague, they talk about what a wonderful interaction they had, right? And so this is not toxic positivity to put a band. People have really terrible experiences at work, but we tend not to talk about all the other good things, all the things that I learned. And so, if we can start changing that narrative of what you said before about what is the benefit of me working with a colleague from a different age, and maybe it's a decades one way or the other. And if we could start encouraging people to look for and talk about within their own team and then but also to their partners and in the community of the benefit they had to counter this, again, I say lazy narrative that the other generations out to lunch, they're not as good as, they are lazy or they are entitled or whatever it might be. They have no idea what things cost. Um, that goes on both sides, trying to encourage people to tell, I think, really the truth. And the truth is that most people are showing up trying to be professionals and want to help one another. So how do we capitalize on how the vast majority of people are already showing up? And how do leaders help bridge those gaps when they come to age so that we can have more of that?
I agree. And I think all of what you're talking about requires conversations that are sometimes uncomfortable, conversations that require vulnerability or patience or, opening your mind and it's like pulling apart magnets, like to take your thoughts away from the stereotypes. And that's work. And people, it's hard, I think what we're talking about always requires, like you were saying, it's continual and ongoing. There's no real end point. You can't just set a policy and think it will solve these problems or these challenges. And yes, so I want to express empathy for, all of us who are so busy and don't feel like we have the time to to do that work of difficult, tough conversations. Or maybe they don't even have to be tough, but they're just sometimes a little bit uncomfortable and make you a little squeamish. But if you put that work in, it really does pay huge dividends. And again, I would love to see more research around this, about how it really makes a big difference in the way a company functions and how well it performs.
Yeah, absolutely. It is harder to capture, but I would think that, I mean, of course, it's harder to capture how somebody feels. That's much different than,
Yeah.
you know, how many sick days did somebody have, right?
Right.
So, my last question for you is, as you look into the future of work, what do you think needs to happen so that all people, independent of their age, will be treated with dignity and respect? But more than that, they'll be encouraged to thrive and flourish.
I think that the one thing that we can do and need to do is get continue pulling this into awareness. This topic, when I first started working on this issue and talking to employers about the value of older workers 10 years ago, this was not on anybody's radar. And it has finally slowly started to become on people's radar. We need to continue bringing it up into, taking things that are in our unconscious mind and our stereotypes that we, for good evolutionary reasons, jump to conclusions, but we need to do that work to bring that up into kind of conscious awareness. And then we need to adopt, I think a huge part of it is adopting a growth mindset. I was raised in a time, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, where my parents believed that, or the culture believed, that you're born with this innate set of abilities. And between that and hard work, you'll get ahead, but you can't really change those innate set of abilities. And now we've started to realize that adopting a growth mindset, and my son he's 12 and he'll say, well, I don't know how to do that yet.
Mm.
Not, I don't know how to do that. And it's built now into our sort of educational norms. Adopting a growth mindset is really key to developing that baseline assumption that you are here and you have something to offer, and I will give you that respect without prejudging you. So a culture of respect in terms of ability and skills, I think, is built on a growth mindset.
I love that answer. Well, Heather, thank you so much. And if people want to know more about AARP, I mean, it's pretty easy to find out, but what would you say if people are interested in finding out more about working on these issues of bringing this awareness?
Great. So if you are a 50 plus job seeker or a 30 plus colleague of an older worker or anywhere in between, AARP has plenty of resources to help you with the job search and career change and all of those things. If you go to aarp.org/work, you'll find all kinds of resources and help there. If you are in HR and listening to this podcast, or in workforce planning or any kind of workforce management, and you want to avail yourself of some of our professional resources, which is what my team and I work on, you can go to aarp.org/employers. We have all kinds of great resources there, including how to have age-inclusive hiring practices, team management practices, etc.
Wonderful. Well, Heather, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a lovely conversation.
Thanks, Mary. Great talking with you too.
Take care. Heather, thank you so much for being on Conflict Managed. I really enjoyed our conversation. Could have talked to you for a very long time about all the work that you are doing. So if you are interested in the work that Heather and her team are doing at AARP, I encourage you to go out and look and find those resources. And if you are interested in my work, which is Winning the Generation Wars at Work, Making Your Age an Asset, this is my new book that just recently came out. It's about how to get over those stereotypes. How do we have those conversations? How do we re-educate ourselves so that we don't fall into that laziness, but really we build bridges with our colleagues so that everybody can have a healthy work environment. Conflict Managed is produced by third-party workplace conflict restoration services and hosted by me, Mary Brown. You can find us online at 3pconflictrestoration.com. Come back. We have new episodes every Tuesday. And if you would like and subscribe wherever you're listening or watching this, much appreciated. Our music is courtesy of Dove Pilot. And remember, conflict is normal and expected. Let's deal with it. Until next time.